So good afternoon. I'm just so thankful that you're here today and can join us to learn what we're going to learn. And my name is Cassandra Robertson. I serve on the SafePlace Steering Committee, and I'm the co-coordinator for the Corvallis Sustainability Coalition's Action Housing Team. And on behalf of our team, I'd like to welcome you to today's program. Our co-sponsored is Unity Shelter, which provides safe shelter through emergency and transitional housing to those in our community who have none. The purpose of today's webinar is to share with you the story of SafePlace. And I'll begin with a brief overview of the SafePlace Microshelter program. Then our featured speaker, Lisa Hawash, will present an assessment of the program that includes demographic data, feedback from SafePlace participants who were interviewed about their experience, and recommended changes to the program. Following Lisa's talk, the executive director of Unity Shelter, Shawn will briefly explain how you can help support SafePlace, how the community can help. After the presentations, we're going to have plenty of time for questions. So please type questions into the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen. And also, if you could limit and not really use the chat. I find that can be really distracting, and we really want to focus our attention on the speakers that are talking today and the information they have to share. In the upper right-hand corner of your screen, there's view, so you can look at the what's being presented in a couple different ways. Just want to alert you to that option. And this is being recorded and will be available on the sustainablecorvallis.org website. So let's get started. So a little background, this is the fun part. It's quite spectacular how this has all come together. Back in 2018, the Coalition's Housing Action Team started researching what other communities were doing to help people experiencing homelessness. There were a handful of communities with successful transitional housing models, including Square One Villages in Eugene, who had created a microshelter village called Opportunity Village. So we reached out to them and to local service providers and potential partners here in town, and we took a road trip to tour the village, and it was super insightful and got us all very hopeful of what could possibly happen here in Corvallis. Then Square One Villages began working with us. They led a workshop in Corvallis, which 23 people attended from 10 different organizations and local government. And then in November of 2018, the Housing Action Team sponsored a public event with presentations from Square One Villages executive director and one of their residents. And this content of this presentation, and then your questions and the number of community members attending, showed us that there was a lot of support to move forward with this idea. And I'm just curious if some of you who are here today were there in November when I feel like this started to galvanize this vision. So then in 2019, we started to get to work. We created committees and started looking at available land, determining fundraising techniques, and talking to faith communities to find potential host sites. We had meetings with the city and the county to see how ordinance changes could allow for microshelters. We worked more closely with service providers to learn what roles different agencies could provide. And we began discussions with local contractors about microshelter design and construction. And one contractor, Mark Carsmerl, a good friend of mine, he just said, I'm just going to build one. And he did. And that was the first microshelter that just got built before we had a program, site, anything. A microshelter got built. So as all this work was happening simultaneously across town at the First Congregational United Church of Christ on a Sunday morning in July of 2019, they became aware that someone had been arrested and trespassed the previous evening for sleeping on their front porch. So they contacted Benton County Sheriff's Department and were told they had just assumed they wouldn't want people living on the property. And this became a pivotal moment for the church as they became aware of just how many folks were present in the tree farm to the west of the church and how limited their access to shelter was and how disrupted their lives were by the constant cyclings of posting and sweeping of camps. So this is according to the folks living in the tree farm that summer, that as the sheriff's department posted camps, people passed the word that the Congregational Church was a safe place. So one night, an individual living in the tree farm on the border of the church called Jen Butler, the pastor, to report that her camp was being posted. Jen drove to the church in the middle of the night to witness this woman's experience, which was pretty intense and hard. She then asked the sheriff department to not trespass anyone from the church property, and they requested that she mark the property line clearly. The next morning, they taped it off. 24 hours later, the western section of their property was filled with 30 tents. Within a day, individuals and organizations from around the community responded to this with outreach, with support and resources to help navigate this very clear call for shelter. So at this point, Jen learned about the work the Housing Action Team had been doing and invited us to collaborate. And from here, things really galvanized and the work started to take off. So we began working with local service providers to develop what a transitional housing community could look like and how it would operate. We reached out to more contractors to begin building microshelters. We reached out to you and for funds to build microshelters. And in those first few months of fundraising, we raised almost $100,000 and microshelters were built. So thank you so much if you were part of that initial fundraising effort. We reached out to faith communities to secure more host sites, and Corvallis Evangelical Church and First United Methodist Church joined the program. We held weekly meetings with the folks living at Safe Camp to get their input and better understand the needs of residents actually living on the site. The city of Corvallis updated the overnight parking permit program, including allowing microshelters. It was a big move. And then in February of 2020, the first 6 microshelters were completed and delivered to Safe Camp. And then COVID hit and we just kept going. We placed the first residents in those shelters and continued running Safe Camp with many of the original people who had arrived the summer before. Corvallis Housing First began providing case management services for residents. We delivered 4 more shelters to First Methodist and 1 shelter to Evangelical Church. In the summer of 2020, First Congregational Church obtained their conditional use permit for Safe Camp. And that fall, we received a very wonderful grant from the city of Corvallis to build 16 more shelters. So throughout that fall, we were building and creating sites. In the winter of 2021, we expanded by 1 more site at the men's shelter and now had 26 shelters in use. Since then, the Crescent Valley High School, Tualatin High School, and College Hill have all signed on to build microshelters as part of their SHOP curriculum. And now in 2022, we have 2 new sites, Life Community Church and Good Samaritan Episcopal Church. So at this time, we are able to provide safe shelter for people experiencing homelessness in 29 microshelters located at 6 different host sites, which includes Safe Camp. And Safe Camp is the largest of the sites with 14 of those microshelters. So I just completely, if you can't tell as I'm talking about this, warms my heart to share all of this of where we've come in, a relatively short time with the collaboration and a lot of hard work and a lot of focus. So we can really do great things in any community. We put our minds to it and get people on board. So I'm going to show you a quick slideshow just so that you get an idea of what some of these spaces look like. This is a micro shelter. We originally were calling them tiny houses and that got confusing. So we changed it to a micro shelter because it's a really teeny tiny place. And as I said, Square One Villages really helped us to begin this process of learning about this. Is Opportunity Village down in Eugene when we went on that tour. I think we had about 2 or 3 tours down there. This is our contractors team just starting to build. We had G. Christensen, Mark Cosmerl, David Henderer, Henderer Design, Andrew Weniger, Kevin Groh. I'm probably forgetting somebody. And it was in the middle of winter, so everyone was doing what they could to keep things dry. This is the Christensen site. We even found a place to build inside. So we partnered with Benton County, and then moving the shelters was no small task. They would get built somewhere else and then move to the sites. And this is Edie Hughes, and both Edie Hughes and G. Christensen really helped us to get these shelters put into place. And you can see, especially here, this was a very hard job. We had about 2 inches between trees to squeeze these things through, but we did it. Only 1 broken window, I think, was the only thing. This is at First Methodist, moving the first shelters there. This is the first team of moving, first day of moving. This is First Methodist site. And there's pictures of what the inside looks like. They're very simple living quarters. This is Safe Camp in the trees, and we did replace the tenting with microshelters. So now there's only microshelters at Safe Camp. This is also Safe Camp. This is the evangelical church, and they now have one additional shelter there. This is a single living unit, so one person. We created some ADA accessible units with ramps and doors that we can get folks who are in wheelchairs in and out. These are the new ones at the Episcopal Church, and they allow for multiple people to be able to live in them. And as I said, the schools are getting involved, which is just a win-win. They learn construction, actual construction. They learn about these issues in the community. It's just fantastic that we have those schools on helping us with this project. And then Safe Camp had a photographer come through and do these beautiful portraits. And we just wanted to show them, to show the people who are actually benefiting from these services. And they got these lovely portraits made one day in, I think 2019. And then of course our fearless leader here, Shawn. These are such great pictures. Portraits are so nice. And this is Jen Butler, who had the courage to open up her property those first few days. And here's me and Mark and Bruce with the first microshelter that was built. Thank you. So let's move into the formative evaluation of SafePlace, what we're all here to listen to today. Lisa Hawash is an associate professor of practice at Portland State University School of Social Work. She's been working alongside people experiencing homelessness for nearly 20 years. She wants to see programs reflect the needs of the people they serve and to embrace practices that incorporate the experiences and insights of those who are unhoused, as they are the experts in their own lives. And I personally really appreciate this approach and have learned so much from Lisa working with her over these past few years. And I'm really excited for you to get to hear what she has to say. Hi, Lisa.
Hi. Right. Thank you, Cassandra. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Thank you all for joining. We're very excited to present what we have learned in this first formative evaluation of the experience of some of the folks who have gone through the SafePlace microshelter program within Unity Shelter. I just want to also introduce a person that could not be here today, but this would not have happened without the amazing work of one of our former interns who was working on her Bachelor of Social Work degree, Hillary Rothenberger, who then this last year was working on her master's degree and partnered with me to do this formative evaluation. The year prior, we had our first social work intern, myself and Dan Easdale from Corvallis Housing First partnered to supervise Hillary in learning and working alongside the folks at SafePlace and doing case management, as well as really taking a leadership role in our intake process for SafePlace. Normally Hillary and I co-present, but Hillary just graduated with her master's and started her new job last week. So, but I just want to give a shout out to Hillary for the collaboration on this. We would not have had the deep conversations that she was able to have without her, because she had relationship with the folks that were interviewed. So to start with, I just want to share a bit about why we chose to do a formative evaluation. Formative evaluations can be really useful when programs are new, and SafePlace is a quite new program. Unity Shelter is a new organization. And so we really approach this from that framework of trying to set kind of a framework and a process so that this can then be replicated in the future for SafePlace to continue to do evaluation and just to check in with folks who are residing in the microshelters and the different parts of the SafePlace program in order to continue to improve, to change, and to evolve as both a program and as an organization. So the methodology that we crafted, Hillary and I, where we created 16 qualitative questions. We constructed themes from the responses that we gleaned from these qualitative interviews with folks. Some of these interviews lasted several hours, and this really speaks to when you have a person who is facilitating these types of interviews and engaging in dialogue with folks about their experiences, relationship is foundational. And Hillary had relationship with a lot of the people because she not only brought them in through the intake process, most of them, she also was their case manager for that 6 to 8 months while they were in the Microshelter program. We were provided about 57 names to contact to try and set up interviews, people that had either started out in tents within the faith community land, what is Safe Camp, but many of those had moved through the Microshelter process. We ended up with, or Hillary ended up engaging in 19 one-to-one interviews that took place between last October of 21 and December of 21. So we did a lot of planning in September, and then we're interviewing folks across about a 2.5 month period. So this is really one thing to keep in mind about this particular evaluation is it's a snapshot of a period of time. But if you recall from what Cassandra shared, this is now about 2 years into the Microshelter SafePlace program, where more Microshelters have been added in different communities, and more people have both moved in and moved on from the Microshelters. So I want to start with just talking about the intake process. The intake process was actually started by several people. Cassandra was one of them back in 2019, 2020. This was prior to the pandemic, where we would meet and just talk about what does the intake process need to look like? What are some of the solid practices and best practices we want to incorporate? And then we officially launched the intake process in October of 2020. And that was started through a phone intake line where folks could call, leave their contact information, and let us know what they were interested in. And then the follow-up with the social work intern, which was Hillary, would then be to reach back to people and try to connect with them from that phone call. So people might leave their email or their phone number or a friend's phone number, or leave a number that was Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center and their name. And so Hillary would then go about trying to connect back with people. One thing that was initially a struggle was people's phones were no longer in service, either their own phone or someone else's phone. She utilized the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center quite a bit, as well as folks from the SORT team. Alita at the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center was a huge asset in connecting with folks and then saying, you know, Hillary's trying to reach out to you. Let's set up a time and you can meet with her. And so Alita really helped to facilitate some of those initial dialogues when the phone numbers were not accessible any longer. In 2021, we were connecting with folks. It continued to be a challenge due to that contact info not being accessible any longer. And so Hillary really started engaging in more street outreach. So she would drive to different parts of the community where people mentioned that they stayed, where their tent was, or so forth, and then began this kind of intake interview process. Currently, jumping forward to 22, other organizations are predominantly the entities that are referring people to us through the intake line as well as an email. And the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center and the SORT team are two entities who frequently refer folks to the SafePlace intake line. Our process is really rooted and centered around a coordinated entry process with numerous factors accounted for, including the physical and mental health current challenges that a person has, their age, the gender, if a person identifies as transgender, if a person identifies as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. We know from research and lots of data out there around, from the National Alliance to End Homelessness is just one example, that BIPOC folks in particular experience a level of disparity in accessing housing that are not necessarily experienced at the same in the same way that it is for white folks across the country. We also work to consider a range of factors that connect to that individual's vulnerability and their risk factors. We also review the given spaces or sites that we have open and available. People are moving in and out of the different Microshelters all the time. Some people are staying for weeks or months, some people a little bit longer. And so, there's movement across the overall Safe Place program. We also have some spaces, the Evangelical Church is one of them, that there is no drinking or street drug use allowed. And so for people that need to have a safe, clean, and sober space, that is a space that we can intentionally place folks who need that, or just needing to be in a smaller community. Safe Camp is a much larger community, and so there's more people around. Some people, have voiced in the intake process, they need to be around just a few people. And so we're really looking at one of our smaller size locations that just have 3 or 4 microshelters. So part of that process is just really looking at this whole person that we're interacting with, and what are their in the moment needs, and what do we have available in order to support them through this transitional housing. So some things that we learned, I'm going to share quite a bit of demographics and data just to kind of give you a picture of the 19 folks that Hillary interviewed. 53% of the 19 folks identified as white, 9% or 47% identified as BIPOC folks. I've noted the specific makeup of the BIPOC community members here on the left. So that's important. It's important for people to self-identify and not, check a checkbox and kind of be lumped together as just BIPOC in general, but specifically how folks identify. 53% of those that were interviewed identified as male, 47% or 9 folks identified as female. We know that there are often more, or in my 20 years of experience, there are often more female and female identified people living and trying to survive outside. They're often not counted in the most robust way in point in time counts due to safety fears of keeping more hidden than at times male counterparts. So that's important to just keep in mind, that there are numerous female identified female and transgender folks outside, but there's also something that exists within folks around staying hidden from view for their own safety, especially from experiences with violence. The age range of those 19 folks was age 31 to 65 years old. The average age of those 19 folks was 42. Their average length of homelessness when they were interviewed in fall of 21 was 12 years. 9 of the 19 residents were age 60 to 65. And their combined length of homelessness for those 9 people was 117 years. 117 years of these 9 people have survived in outside spaces. 10 of the residents aged 31 to age 59 had a combined length of homelessness of 104 years. Many of these folks had consistent homeless experience, not episodic, where they were out for a few years, they went inside for a few years, but many of these folks have been trying to survive outside for the entire amount of years that they shared with us. And I think it's important to remember that being homeless, whether it's a year, it's 5 years, it's 10 years, it's 17 years, it fundamentally changes a person and how they interact and react to the world around them. Something that showed up a lot, and not surprisingly in our formative evaluation, was around access to hygiene and access to health. This particular resident quoted, "It really impacted me big time." And this was around accessing hygiene and being able to access hygiene, being able to access clean restrooms, water and soap to wash your hands, showers to bathe, laundry to wash your clothes so that you're putting on clean clothes. This person noted, "It really impacted me big time. I never have to worry about wearing dirty clothes or being dirty. I always have clean clothes now." It was really important to us when we started constructing microshelters to really look at all the needs of a person and not solely and only housing people in microshelters, but what are all of the basic needs that folks need access to. Of course, they need access to safe, uninterrupted sleep in a bed with their own belongings around them, but they also needed access to hygiene, which also then creates access to better health. There are other ways this shows up, which I'll explain as I move forward. But we realized that we needed to create hygiene spaces, not just bathrooms and the hand washing that existed, like in Safe Camp or in the Evangelical Church, but also access to showers and laundry. So Benton County worked with us to allow us access to the restroom, shower, laundry facility at the fairgrounds. And twice a week, Dial-A-Bus partnered with us and we're driving folks from Safe Camp over to the laundry and shower facility so that folks could shower and wash their clothes. Eventually, we moved on from that to using the hygiene solely at the men's shelter. And that both have been a huge asset to folks, and they reported that throughout our Hillary's discussions. So this access to housing, access to health, we also know there are large amounts of research that shows that people's health improves when they get housed. People's health, small health issues become potentially catastrophic health issues for folks that are living outside. So this intention of access to housing creates an access to health is real. It really shifted for a lot of the folks we interviewed. Housing as healthcare in particular is an area of research that there's lots of research affirming that through housing, people's health improves. It is considered to be one of the best researched social determinants of health for people to have access to housing that is clean, that is safe. And housing interventions for low-income folks have been found to improve their health outcomes. Through the case management support, through people like Hillary and other case managers from Corvallis Housing First that were partnering with our microshelter residents, some of the residents acquired various housing supports, which included the permanent supportive housing. 3 of the 19 folks received the permanent supportive housing grant. 1 received a Section 8 voucher, and 6 of the residents received emergency housing vouchers. These are really profound and paramount to people being able to move on from the transitional microshelter into more permanent housing. And permanent housing can look like a range of things. So we need to think beyond permanent housing of just being moving into an apartment by oneself, but it could be the Van Buren house as permanent housing. It could be moving in with a couple of friends as permanent housing. So in regards to case management is a key component of folks being in microshelters and really creating spaces for residents to define their own goals rather than have the goals be defined by housed people, but really having an opportunity to define their own goals around what supports and what access to supports that they need. So through this case management, what I've listed here are all the different forms of ID and supportive services that those 19 folks got access to. 14 of the 19 got signed up for Oregon Health Plan. 13 were supported in getting signed up for SNAP TANF benefits. 8 were able to receive their Social Security card. 8 of those were also able to receive Social Security benefits. Without a Social Security card, you cannot tap into benefits. 16 were able to receive their Oregon ID card or Oregon driver's license. 1 person was able to receive their tribal ID card. 11 were able to access their birth certificate. For all of these, can be a huge struggle because you need one thing to get the next thing to get the next thing. And having someone help you navigate these systems on any given day is beneficial, but during a pandemic is even more so because access was incredibly limited to the DMV as one example. For people that were born out of state, accessing their birth certificates was incredibly challenging as well. I want to bring us back to the middle section here that talks about physical health and mental health supports. 14 were able to access physical health supports, meaning providers, and 9 of the 19 were able to access mental health supports. This is connection to healthcare providers and navigating health systems. So if we think about when we have no access, and for those of us that are housed that have not had good access to health insurance, we may utilize urgent care if we have the money, if we have the $100 copay, or really utilizing ER for some smaller health concerns as well as larger health concerns. When you don't have access to health insurance and when you're homeless, the ER is generally your option. The ER is very expensive. But what has happened is through this supportive service is people have not only gotten Oregon Health Plan, but they've gotten support through their case worker and case managers to, make appointments with providers for wellness checks, for physicals, for, getting that foot x-ray that has had an injury for the last couple of years, for getting wound care and so forth, and getting mental health supports for those that need it, that as well. And so it really flips that experience for folks who have never accessed healthcare or mental health care, physical or mental health care in a proactive or preventative way, that it's always been urgent and for potentially something that is catastrophic. And so this really flips the opportunity for folks to have access. And then for some of them, they knew how to access care and what to do once they got into care and to connect to different providers. For some people, this was a very new experience. And so just having the supports of that caseworker was really profound. And I can't emphasize that enough. Health and well-being, access to physical and mental health. So some of the experiences that folks shared, one thing we want to note is that housing and healthcare work when best partnered together and are essential to both preventing and ending a person's homelessness. 16 people spoke to their incredibly deteriorating health whilst trying to survive outside. Again, health issues that may be small became quite exacerbated, and for some people could be deadly when they are trying to survive outside and don't have access to care, don't have access to hygiene, keep their body clean or their clothes clean or their wound clean if they received a cut or a scrape that became much bigger. 7 residents mentioned that they are always trying to survive, and they experienced some discrimination within the healthcare settings as they tried to access care in the ER or in other settings due to their being perceived as homeless. So they felt as if they were treated differently. 14 residents were able to obtain the OHP Oregon Health Plan and were able to get connected with physical health and mental health providers. There are numerous of those 19 folks that we know of, those of us that have been working with folks, those of folks from Corvallis Housing First Community Shelter that know that some of these folks were able to get surgeries that they've been waiting on for years. They were waiting to get housed and then to get better access to care in order to get some surgeries that would help them to move better through life and to be more mobile, as in one example. Some residents also noted that they would frequently self-medicate with drugs or alcohol to cope with just trying to survive outside. 6 folks noted that. And some noted severe paranoia and flashbacks related to past trauma and PTSD. I think it's important to just name that the trauma and PTSD that folks experience in trying to survive outside is immense, and it doesn't just immediately disappear once folks move inside. And go back to what I said about an average length of homeless experience was 12 years. The longer that a person is experiencing homelessness and the experiences they have while being outside can drastically alter their ability to be able to function inside. And as someone who's worked in Portland with folks that are homeless for a decade and a half in particular, people are always surprised that when people do move inside and they can't stay. For a housed person, it challenges our mind to say, well, what do you mean you're housed? Why can't you do this? And yet there's something about the experience of homelessness that does not just make it easy to just go inside and completely turn your life around when you've been living in a survival mode for so long. So I think that's a piece of learning for a lot of us, is just to better understand how that lived experience of homelessness and trying to survive outside in the elements fundamentally changes the way that one potentially moves through the world. We also asked questions related to living in community at SafePlace. You are living in community with others, regardless of what site the person is staying in. Again, Safe Camp is the largest site. The other ones are have 3 or 4 microshelters. So living in community is something that not everybody has experienced, and they may, while living outside, may kind of, be on their own most of the time, or they may always be in partnership and community with other folks. But living in community at Safe in the Safe Place program was a shift for some folks, but also in a really positive way. 13 of the 19 folks talked about having a really deep sense of belonging amongst their peers in the community, being in a space of having shared lived experiences with the folks that they were, sitting with to have breakfast, or having a cigarette in the smoking area, or just sitting on their porch chatting with their neighbor. Those shared living experiences also led to some shared goals for their future, both while in the microshelters, but also post microshelter once they moved on, and the opportunity to help one another within the community as a really positive aspect of the Safe Place program. I know for myself, many times being at Safe Camp, and someone would say, "Hey, I'm heading to the store later. Does anybody need anything? I have a ride," or my friend's picking me up, or I have my bike and I have my bike trailer. So really leaning on each other and utilizing each other for supports and access to live in the way that they as individuals and as a community want to see for themselves. I'm going to read this quote over here on the right that one of the Safe Place residents shared with Hillary. They noted around living in community a sense of security and safety, a feeling that things aren't going to be that bad, and having a more positive outlook on things. There's a sense that you are moving forward and not stagnant. That's what's horrible about being homeless, is you're stagnant. Working with others that are also doing better and trying to make their lives better. You are never alone. We would hear that a lot, and I'm sure that Jen Butler, who's interacting with Safe Camp folks a lot, Garrett at the Evangelical Church, Shawn, Ilea, others who are constantly engaging with folks in the microshelters, hear that a lot, that being in space with others is often very helpful. Even when it's in its most challenging times, it's often very helpful to have someone that has that deep shared lived experience and can come from a place of understanding, as others cannot necessarily come from. So some challenges of living in community, because of course there's going to be challenges. Just the range and difference of personalities, the diverse backgrounds and mental health challenges that some folks come with, different expectations that people come with of what it means to keep space clean in that shared space, so in shared kitchen spaces and so forth. Behavioral expectations combined with communication challenges were reported by all of the residents that were surveyed, those 19 folks. This quote on the right that I'll read, again, directly relating to how people kind of navigate and manage the challenges of living in and amongst community, getting along, negotiating, sharing your thoughts assertively but not aggressively, not respecting personal space and boundaries. There will be different perspective on what it means to be clean. Being polite even when you don't want to talk to other people in that moment. People taking accountability or not taking accountability. Getting constructive feedback rather than blasting people or diming them out. People have mental health issues and addiction issues, and that's hard sometimes. So just this, again, this reality of what it means to be in shared space with others was really prominent in those interviews that Hillary had. Where are they now? Currently, so again, remember this is a snapshot. This was October through December, and she and I really dug into pulling out themes and doing the analysis across the month of late December and into January. So 8 of the 19 were still in Safe Place microshelters. So that Safe Place is a program that could be evangelical, the women's microshelter at Methodist or Safe Camp. 2 had moved to other forms of transitional housing, like 3rd Street Commons as an example. Some were in a housing program like Van Buren or Partners Place, 3 of them. 2 had moved to their own apartment, and 4 of the former Safe Place residents had moved with family or friends. We learned in January that since we'd interviewed folks in October, 2 more of the residents had moved into their own apartment by the time we were doing this analysis. And I know as I look back since then, there's been almost complete, not 100% turnover, but a lot of turnover across all of the microshelters in SafePlace, where people have been able to move into other forms of permanent housing beyond the SafePlace program. So it's continuing to shift and evolve really every month. So some next steps, recommendations that we concluded from our interviews and our analysis were just this opportunity. And I think it is an opportunity to continue to reflect on the processes and the practices and continue to make adjustments. I think it's important that we not become stagnant in the way that we're doing this work, that we're continuing to pay attention to the evolution and to, with each person that we connect with that comes into the program and each person that leaves, that we're able to hear and listen to them and take in those experiences that they have and then make adjustments as needed. It's important to give change time, but it's also important to pivot when and where needed. So take time and also shift in a way that reflects, if something is not going well, we're not going to sit there for another year and just say, well, we're going to try this longer. It's probably time to change. And I've really admired the way that Unity Shelter, Shawn, Jen, others have just recognized that in the moment, okay, we've heard this several times. What change do we need to make, or what modifications do we make, or shifts do we need to make? And so continuing to do that. I think also it is important that we enact an ongoing evaluation process by where a person that is exiting the SafePlace Microshelter program is provided an opportunity to share their experiences and feedback. I think that works best when they have relationships with someone, because what we saw when Hillary did these interviews was there's some trusting relationship built and people felt like they could be honest with her, and we could really fold that into this formative evaluation. I think we need to be mindful of asking people the same questions and also having really open-ended questions. This kind of evaluation takes a lot of capacity to do. And I think doing this in an ongoing way it'll still take a lot of capacity, but it allows for that space to be created for us to constantly be gleaning information and then making those adjustments where necessary. The third note here is to lean on the experiences of those who came first, especially around the need for community and the need for supportive caseworkers. That is really important and vital in this work, is to have supportive casework. People also voiced that having caseworkers with lived experience with homelessness was really important for them. And so thinking about that as folks get hired into our organizations, and as Unity Shelter brings in caseworkers or contracts with other organizations for casework, of just that immense value of having people with lived experience to support others going through this microshelter and accessing their basic need process for a first time in many years for a number of folks. One thing that was missed, and Hillary and I are not sure how we missed this, but we did, is really, we didn't create an opportunity for people to share about their pets. Pets are a huge piece in people's lives, both housed and unhoused, and we didn't ask any questions related to people's cats or dogs that they have brought into the microshelters with them, and just recognizing that pets are family for all of us, and that's something that we need to take into account when folks are moving into different forms of housing from surviving outside. That pet is often their emotional support, their companion. Sometimes it's helps them to move through the world in different ways that are extremely needed. And so that's something that we could definitely do better next time. I just want to thank you all for this opportunity to share. And I think Shawn is going to offer some words next, and then we'll open that up for questions.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I think this is the third time I've heard your presentation, and each time I am so inspired and so encouraged by what you found. So thank you for having this information to share with our community and for doing the work in the first place. So yeah, Shawn's gonna give us some more information about Unity Shelter and how we can support these efforts. This is Shawn Collins. He's the executive director for Unity Shelter, and take it away.
Okay, thanks, Cassandra, and thanks, Lisa, for a great presentation. And thank you all for coming today. So Unity Shelter has really grown a lot in the last couple of years that we've been in existence. We grew rapidly in response to the ongoing homeless crisis or housing crisis. And that's conditions have really been exacerbated a lot by the COVID-19 pandemic. While the pandemic conditions seem to be subsiding a bit, the need to support those who are with housing and shelter in our community continues to grow. In the coming years, the continued effects of the economic disruption of the pandemic, combined with systemic issues such as the lack of affordable housing options, inadequate mental health care, and a growing number of seniors who are going to be exiting the workforce over the next decade, and many of those entering into homelessness, will really press the capacity of many nonprofit providers and other partners like the city and county to meet emerging needs. Since Unity Shelter began in January of 2020, we've helped over 1,300 unhoused men and women in our community. Many that we serve have been victims of domestic violence and suffer from disabilities or chronic illness. And every one of them has suffered from the real trauma of being without adequate housing and shelter. Since its beginning, SafePlace has served 73 men and women. Over half of those, about 60% of the people that have been in the SafePlace program have moved into permanent housing in that time. And another 20% of those have moved into some sort of other transitional or treatment program, transitional housing or treatment program. This is a far higher rate of transition into housing than we see from straight shelter, from emergency shelters. We do see transition from shelter into housing, but it's very hard in an emergency shelter setting to do the kind of wraparound support and engagement that goes on in a place like Safe Camp or in the SafePlace program. This is a model of transitional housing and support that really works, and it changes lives. And we're really excited to see it grow, and really appreciate the work of Lisa and Hillary to do the evaluation on it. To continue this work, Unity Shelter and others in the community are going to need your help in a lot of ways. The first of those is probably obvious. It's give, right? Unity Shelter relies on a mix of funding streams and partnerships to do this work. We rely on donor support to do a lot of things. It fills gaps in grant funding, which is often very specific about the kinds of things that we can do with that funding. It gives us unrestricted funds that can be used for needs that are not identified in those grants, such as emergency supplies, repairs to facilities, support for clients, training for staff, and of course to build microshelters. The early microshelters were all built with donations, and even now we've had several generous donors and coalitions of donors come together to fund microshelter construction and support. Much of what we've been able to do in the SafePlace program has been funded by the generous support of donors. And across Unity Shelter, that's true. You can find a link to online giving and other details about giving to Unity Shelter on the website that's on the screen here. If you look in the help menu under donate, you can find those details. The other thing that you can do is advocate. I think that developing programs like this, they don't really fit neatly into regulatory frameworks. And it's important to make sure that city and county officials and others know that you support them and that you support more innovative programs like this to address the needs of the unhoused. Call for your elected leaders to engage in real collaboration with providers, support projects like this when they're in your area, in your neighborhood. We need help to address the needs of those who are unhoused and underserved in our community, and your advocacy and public support can be very helpful there. Another thing you can do is to volunteer. Our volunteer opportunities have been very much limited by COVID, but we're starting to open that back up. We do have volunteer opportunities at both the men's shelter and the women's shelter right now, and you can find a link to volunteer opportunities on the Unity Shelter website. Again, if you look on the help menu, you'll see a link to volunteer, and you also see a link off any of the program pages for the men's and women's shelter. And we hope to open up some opportunities for SafePlace soon. I guess the last thing that you can do is remember that this work doesn't get done without a lot of partners. I mentioned the city and county, they're key partners in this. Community Services Consortium has been a key partner, but there are many others, including Stone Soup, the Lynn Benton Food Share Program, Corvallis Housing First, which has been a terrific partner for case management. And a lot of the folks that have moved into housing have moved into Corvallis Housing First properties. And Samaritan Health Services, Benton County Health Department, mental health and crisis support and harm reduction teams have all been really key partners for this work. So be aware that it takes a big network of partners in the community to do this work. If you can't support us, reach out and support other programs that do support folks like the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center, COI, CARDVA, there's Corvallis Housing First. It takes a team to make changes in our community that really serve the folks who are lacking housing and adequate support. So you've got opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shawn. So I see that we already have questions piling up. So I want to introduce Annette Mills. She's the facilitator of the Corvallis Sustainability Coalition, and she's going to moderate the questions and answers part of this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. And I just have to say, Cassandra was the one who had the vision for the Microshelter program, and just really appreciate her passion. So we've got our three speakers up here, such great presentations, and this is such important information to share with our community. So thank you, all three. We already have some great questions. Some of them are very logistical and others are bigger picture. Here's a logistical question to start. Are women using the hygiene center at the men's shelter? That's probably a question for Shawn.
They are. The hygiene center is open to anyone between the hours of 11 and 5 Monday or 7 days a week. And so we serve men and women there every day.
Right, thank you. Is there a staff specialist or a volunteer whose sole role is to assist with identity documentation? I know, Lisa, you mentioned that that is a major stumbling block for some folks. Is there somebody who's pretty much dedicated to addressing that need?
Well, the caseworker and case managers support folks in accessing that, because everybody, one person may have an ID, but they need their social security card. So, excuse me, that caseworker is working with them on a consistent basis and works toward their goals.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And then one more logistical question here. How are people's belongings managed that they bring with them when moving into a micro shelter? And are there accessible storage units?
So that's an excellent question. We do, we've got storage, obviously inside the micro shelters. I mean, we provide some tubs for folks' belongings and some shelving and places to hang clothes. We also do provide storage. We've got a couple of storage units out here at the First Congregational Church. And so we're able to do some offsite storage for folks.
Okay, great. Next couple of questions are really bigger picture, I think. What have been the reactions of the neighbors, especially at Safe Camp and the men's shelter, and how have you worked through these issues? Shawn, that's probably yours too.
That's probably me.
Yeah.
I think that neighborhood relationships have been, something that has evolved as we've gone. It's sometimes, there have been times where it's been a little bit rocky, but I think that the big thing that we've done is really engage. We've, in every location that we've gone to, whether it's the Safe Camp location here at First Congregational, we have a monthly meeting with the neighborhood association representation. They have a group that meets with us every month, and kind of keeping that channel open so that there's really easy two-way conversation there. And when issues arise, they can be addressed. We've talked with neighborhood associations when we went into Corvallis Evangelical, when we've opened up other sites. A lot of it is making sure that the neighbors know that they have a channel, know who they can call, that the host site, the folks at the churches where we've been hosted have some easy channel to reach out to us, and we're obviously regular collaborators with them. I think the men's shelter location, the micro shelters there have been less of a concern, I think, for the neighborhood overall, as just I think early in the pandemic, when there was a lot of camping and unmanaged camping in the BMX park area, it was a challenge for the co-op. And I think Cindy Lawlick, I think I saw her in the attendees today. I think that what we have done with the co-op is just keep that channel as open as possible. Cindy and her team at the co-op have been awesome about reaching out to us whenever there's issues. Just the short answer there is communicate, right? Keep that channel open.
Great, thank you. So another kind of a big picture question is that there are some folks who may not be comfortable living at a faith-based community site. So how is this navigated in Unity Shelter, and what is the intention or other benefits to placing these shelters at religiously affiliated places? I don't know if Lisa, if you've had any experience with that, or Shawn, if you want to take that one as well.
Yeah, I think between us, we can both answer this and maybe parts of it. I think that there are opportunities for businesses to, have micro shelters on their property. I think as of to date, we don't have any that have made that choice. Is that accurate, Shawn?
Yeah.
That faith communities have been the partners that have kind of, when we've reached out to them or they've reached out to Jen or Garrett or Shawn to say, we would like to, be considered as a site. I think that faith communities have seen this, not just the leaders of the faith community, but the members, the constituents have seen this as part of their, living out their values. And at the same time, this is a program of a nonprofit, a 501c3 of Unity Shelter. So these are not faith-based spaces. They are utilizing the generosity of the land of the faith communities in which they reside. And there are agreements that, there won't be proselytizing between people within the faith community site and the residents of the micro shelters. Some of the faith communities have deemed that their community says there can be no alcohol at all and within this community. I'm not talking about in the shelter, but they can't be, on the property drinking a beer or what have you. And so that's part of the agreement that we come to agreement with that community partner as well. Unity Shelter does. Shawn, do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered it very well. There's certainly an opportunity, and I think it's clear within the city permitting process, and the county would be very much the same. We could do this on a business property if a business is interested in partnering with Unity Shelter on that. But it has been the faith communities that have stepped forward and really open up spaces. When that happens, we have a lot of conversation, right? It's a process to become a host site, and there's a lot of conversation about what the expectations are, and making sure that people understand in the faith community that we're not asking them to become case managers. We're not asking them to be the regular contact with folks. We want them to be welcoming hosts, but not feel like they have to take on all of the responsibility for engagement with this person, connecting them with services, providing that case management. That's really our role. I think that Jen Butler in a meeting recently with a faith community that's open site described it as the faith community is kind of they're the hotel host. Maybe the concierge a little bit, but we're really the staff on the ground that are going to be making sure that we're the day-to-day interaction with those folks. And I think that the experience that we've had is that every community that we've worked with, every faith community we've worked with, has really respected that line very clearly. I mean, it's not a problem for them. They really want to make sure that they're supporting people in a way that is safe for them. and recognizes their needs.
Great, thank you. And actually, this is a appropriate follow-up question. Is finding a place for additional micro shelters a problem, or are there places that are actually waiting for one?
We don't have any lined up right now. We're in the process of opening 2 new sites, one at Life Community Church, which is actually in the county. It's up on Highway 99, and then at Good Samaritan Episcopal Church, which is at 35th and Harrison. Those are the 2 that we have lined up right now. I think that my perspective, I guess, would be that some of this is, faith communities are all kind of trying to figure out how to reopen after the pandemic conditions have subsided, and how to use their property more, most effectively. And so I think that there's kind of a little bit of wait and see, like, how is this working for other churches, right? And so I think as more sites come online and it works, then I think it'll open the door up a little bit. Right now, we're not sitting on there's kind of a carrying capacity question in terms of how much our organization can expand rapidly, right? We expanded very rapidly during the pandemic. If we had 10 new sites that, raised their hand tomorrow and said they all wanted micro shelters, we would really struggle to open up that many that fast, right?
Right, yeah, thanks, Shawn. Cassandra, I'm gonna throw this question at you. What is the average cost of a micro shelter? Could a community group sponsor or fundraise for building one?
Absolutely. And we actually have a few community groups that have done that. So right now, and it's changing a little bit because material prices in the last year have really skyrocketed, but it's between 16 and 18,000 to pay a contractor to build them. It's just about 6,000 to get the materials. And so that's what we're paying to the schools. So that would be a good marker for a group to fundraise for. I can get the exact amount. We just had another round built. So I don't know the exact amount, but it's somewhere around 6,000 for the schools to build them with their labor.
So actually, I have a question related to that. So are you just talking about the construction costs, or are you talking about everything that goes into it? And I would love to have you talk about heating and cooling systems. I noticed in the photographs, there is a unit, in each of the micro shelters. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And,
it's about 6,000 and probably adding maybe 500 for the bed and the tables and the curtains and whatnot. But that does include the heating system. And we just, I'm an energy nerd and I've been waiting for this product for years, but is a window-sized heat pump. So what we were able to put in is a small heat pump. So it heats and cools at a very efficient rate. Which we had heaters in these, but we didn't have any cooling device, and it got really hot the first summer with the first folks living in them. So we learned very quickly we need both. So I'm super excited about that. So if people want to fundraise, we could get a very specific number, target number. That's today's prices to make that happen.
Great.
Yeah. Last community group that did it was there was a Central Park Neighborhood Initiative, and their target number was 16,000. They actually raised a little bit more than that. That was a good number a year ago. I do think we need to look at that again to make sure that that number still works. But part of that is for construction and then the placement work, right? There's infrastructure that has to be in place, electrical work, et cetera.
Yeah. Lisa, I see your hand is up. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add to this conversation that, because I also see some of the other questions, something that's really important and that we always have to keep to the center is, yes, building micro shelters, there's such an opportunity there. Space, having communities or businesses step up to have these, but also the infrastructure for the organization. The outcomes that we're seeing would not be the same without the supportive services. That is what is helping and supporting folks to move towards their self-identified goals. So the infrastructure for Unity Shelter and for case management support as well as to, like Safe Camp has a site manager that's on site X number of hours a day. And so all of that, it has to all be wrapped around. In addition to, sometimes people get really excited about, we can contribute towards building the micro shelter, but we have to have all the other pieces built out. It's a both and, not an either or. So I just want to offer that up.
Thank you. And I don't know if this would be a question for you, Lisa, or for Shawn. Have some of the people who have been in the Safe Place program returned to being houseless or experiencing houselessness?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it speaks a bit to the program, right? This is transitional housing. There are program guidelines and agreements that people sign when they move in about both their behavior and their participation in the program. So we have had to exit a couple of people from the program in the last 2 years. It's been a very small number. It's about, it's less than 10% of the people that have come into the program have exited to back to the street, but it does happen.
Right. So when Cassandra was telling the story of Safe Place, she started out by talking about how the Sustainability Coalition's Housing Action Team had visited Opportunity Village down in Eugene. And there are a couple questions I'm going to combine here that have come in. What is Unity Shelter's vision for housing in Corvallis? What would the program look like with enough funding, and might it ever transition into being a Opportunity Village type place where there would be shared kitchens and other facilities like that? I don't know who wants to answer that one.
I tackled that a little bit, and Lisa, Cassandra, feel free to jump in here if you want. But I think if you look at Safe Camp and look at Opportunity Village, you are looking at something that's very much a parallel, right? At Safe Camp, we do have a shared kitchen space. We do have, we're adding a shower and laundry trailer at the site, probably in the month of July. I think that it's as close an analog to Opportunity Village as I think you're going to find here. I think that the vision overall, we'd love to see another opportunity, something like Safe Camp 2, right? I think that is, it relies on a lot of things: funding, opportunity, staffing, right? All of these things have to be in place, because I think it is all, we always say it's more than a roof, right? It's a roof plus all the wraparound services and infrastructure. And so any kind of growth plan has to be measured out in terms of how many people can we actually sustain and support effectively in the program. I'd love to see both at least another site, if not more long term, right? But again, it's all very much funding and opportunity dependent. I also think that the distributed sites that we have at other faith community locations right now, like Good Samaritan, the Good Samaritan site is a really exciting opportunity. It's in an area that does not see that kind of, it's not seen that kind of service, right? Putting new ones in at the men's shelter, okay, that didn't really raise a ripple for anybody. Nobody really notices that. Putting them in a neighborhood like 35th and Harrison, that's very different. And I think that the church has been extremely excited about it, very supportive. And so, as soon as we get people in there, I think it's going to be a great success. And I think that having that kind of geographic diversity around town is a value that the city council has expressed. I think it makes sense for Unity Shelter to pursue that. So, I don't know how to answer the question of, like, what would this look like with enough funding? Because it's hard to know what enough funding would really be to get everybody in. If you think about the vision, part of it is, you've got probably 150 people that are still out on the street tonight, sleeping in tents, sleeping in doorways. I think those people should either be in shelter or micro shelters, some sort of transitional housing, right? I think we need to open that up. I also think we need to recognize that there's a full spectrum of need, including some people that do not want to be inside four walls and a roof. And for a lot of reasons. Some of that because of past trauma that happened with 4 walls and a roof. So we've got to be able to think about how do you accommodate people that really need, for whatever reason, they need to be in a tent or something other than a formal structure, but still keep them safe and well supported so that they're not having to scramble to find food and hygiene and sanitation, or feel like their belongings and their person are not safe every night.
All right, thank you. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. Why are there no micro shelters on public property? And is there anything planned at the new County Justice Center if the funding is approved by the community for the Justice Center? Any response on those 2 related questions?
I don't have a good response for that, particularly on the County Justice Center. I'm not really in touch with the plans there, except to say that I'm not aware of any planning or effort to place micro shelters in that location. I think it would be an interestingly challenging location, right? To put micro shelters next to the jail might not be a very comfortable spot for a lot of people to be, but I think that the question of public property, I think some of that again is opportunity. Is there public property available that can be used in that way? The biggest pieces of property that the city holds are really public works and parks property, and I would leave that to city council and the city manager and others to address that question.
Okay, thanks. And we have someone here who wants to reach out to some of her friends who are skeptical, who keep saying Corvallis isn't doing anything to make housing for the unhoused, and wondered if there is a map or some listing of the SafePlace sites on the Unity Shelter website.
So website still needs a little updating in terms of locations because we're opening up new ones, but I believe we've got listings of the locations there now under the SafePlace program page. I think that the Good Sam and Life Church properties have not been listed there yet, but that's a work in progress.
All right, thanks. And I think I have an answer for this one, but the question is, might the research that Lisa and Hillary have done be put together into an article of information on health in the local papers? It would be great for the reality of statistics and raw stories to be shared with the greater community. And the program today is being recorded and will be posted on the Sustainability Coalition's website, and we would be very happy to send out a follow-up article. The Gazette-Times did a nice job of letting people know about the program today, and we'd be happy if Lisa gives us permission to actually post the study on the site as well as the recording. Lisa?
Yes, that would be fine, Annette.
Okay, and I'm just trying to think if anybody on the panel has any other ideas about how we could get the word out, because the Sustainability Coalition's Housing Action Team actually heard Lisa's presentation, and we were so just really impressed with all of that great information and the recommendations and so on. And that's why we're having this program today. So any of you who are in our audience today, if you can help us think of ways to get the word out, we would much appreciate it. I think that maybe, okay. There are continuing to be some good questions here. How are occupants of SafePlace chosen? What does the selection process entail today? Are most of the residents coming from local shelters or unhoused situations? Lisa, do you want to address that?
Sure. So as I mentioned, historically, we fired up an intake line back in October of 2020. And then kind of use that and street outreach to do outreach to folks who are unhoused and, you know, move them through the intake process. It's kind of continued to morph where the sort team through Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center, the folks at the drop-in center are referring people, as well as from other organizations around town, referring people to the intake line or the intake email. And then they run through a coordinated entry process, and we meet for intake review. Shawn and myself, at least one or two folks from Corvallis Housing First, and the intake person for Unity Shelter go through and kind of process everybody. We currently have a pretty lengthy wait list as more and more folks have heard about access to microshelters. So it's really, you know, people reaching out to us as individuals or coming through organizations. So there's kind of two main ways that folks access the intake process.
Thank you. And let's see. There was a question here about how many people who would otherwise be unhoused are housed in all the different kinds of shelter per night, approximately. And where does the former motel on South 3rd Street, which is 3rd Street Commons, how does that fit into Unity Shelters programming?
So I can take that on.
Okay.
You know, the Unity shelters, we have 42 beds currently at the men's shelter. We have capacity to go to 50. We had downsized during the pandemic and are kind of slowly ramping back up. The room at the Inn Women's Shelter has 22 beds, and they are almost always completely full. So we're continuing to try and sort out how to expand capacity there. The 3rd Street Commons currently has 25 rooms, and those rooms are fully occupied now. I'm going to also kind of tag on to this question that Dave R. had asked about transitional housing. 3rd Street Commons, very much like SafePlace, is considered transitional housing. We often refer to it as a shelter. It is what's classified as non-congregate shelter. But the folks there, we engage with them very much like we do in SafePlace in terms of really working on housing goals with them, trying to do wraparound supports. They have a case manager on site and have regular meetings with the case management staff there. And we've seen a number of folks graduate from that program into housing. SafePlace and the 3rd Street Commons are both, we consider them to be transitional housing. There are people, transition can mean as little as 30 to 90 days. And we've seen that. We've seen transition take as much as 2 years. And we don't set a timeline. We don't set a time limit on that. It's really more a matter of, are we working on this on goals? Some people's barriers to housing are far more complex than others. And then the opportunities for things like Section 8 vouchers and emergency housing vouchers drive some of that too. So.
Okay, there are more questions here about siting more micro shelters, particular interest in the county, a question about siting micro shelters at the fairgrounds and possibly through Samaritan Services. I know that they are one of, Samaritan CCO is one of the partners that was mentioned. So any answers there for us, Shawn?
We could probably spend another hour on a lot of different.
I know.
Questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I mean, there was an RFP that was issued by the city and county that proposed 2 different sites, one in the city and one in the county. The county site was at the fairgrounds. It would have been up to 4 microshelters on that location. Unity Shelter was the only applicant for that, and ultimately we declined to participate in that opportunity. It's a tough site to support in some ways. There were some kind of limitations there that we weren't ready to take on. But I mean, county land, city land, both public and private, we're open to a lot of opportunities. it's important to note that some of them are limited, right? There was an opportunity in Southtown that we were looking at very closely, and ended up hiring some civil engineers to look at the site. Ultimately, we had to pass on it because of the complexities of dealing with floodplain issues in that site were just too great to take on. So it's not just as simple as a bare patch of ground. We've got to be able to actually meet floodplain requirements, make sure that we can get the infrastructure there, and then it's in a site that we can actually provide the safety and security that people need to have this program be effective. It's one of the advantages of being on church property sometimes, is that there are people that are connected to that site who are going to be kind of stewards and caretakers in a way of what's going on that site.
Right. Well, we know that there are a lot of challenges, both in terms of physical infrastructure and also the care that's needed to guide people through. So we are going to bring a close to our Q&A, and Cassandra is going to wrap up for us, but I just wanted to thank Lisa and Shawn and Cassandra again for this great program. Really appreciate it. Cassandra?
Well, I'm going to do the same thing and thank Lisa and Shawn and Annette, and just everyone on the Coalition's Housing Action Team who helped in the early days and have been continuing to support this project, Unity Shelters team, plus just all the partners that Shawn listed, all the people who have really been a support already and are working so hard to create safe shelter for those in need. And I hope everybody who is listening, that you just better understand the challenges people are facing, the challenges of creating such a program, and that you want to get involved in some way. So you can join the Housing Action Team, you can donate money to Unity Shelter or to all of the different partners that we work with. That's always a thing you can do. You can get involved with Unity Shelter, volunteering for them also. And then I really appreciate that Shawn talked about really talking to your friends, your neighbors, and to our local governments, that you share what you've learned today and what it takes to transition folks from trying to survive outside to get stable housing. And that really all of us speaking about this and talking about this is just creating a more caring and courageous community that we all can feel safer in. So this is for everybody who lives in Corvallis. And that's what I love about Unity Shelter and I love about Safe Places. It's really looking at how we create a really caring community. And I think that the presentation today really shows the effects of what this program has done. So I thank all of you for coming. Thank you for all the presentations today. And I hope you have just such a great rest of your day and really enjoy all the sunshine that we're getting now. And just thank you so much for taking the time today.